Once upon a time, there was no social media, let alone the internet, for all of us to obsess over. We didn't have a platform to dedicate to our individuality, and in return receive so much feedback from strangers as a result. We still live within a culture where people call each other horrible names without a moment's thought, such as epithets for gay people or people with disabilities, and said it was all in jest. Representation in cinema or television was not a major concern. In fact, when performers received accolades and nominations for roles in films for portraying someone totally unlike themselves at their core, gay or with a disability, everyone would pat themselves on the back and just say, "Good job." Now, many of that was a result of a boomer mentality. Gen X was a swing generation, caught in the middle of having their ideas fostered from grandparents that lived through World War II and parents born out of the ashes of that war and into civil rights in the Vietnam era. A clash of two ideals that wasn't concerned about the minutiae of things like representation. And it was Gen X who took that mantle and started the uphill battle that would eventually become the signal calling card of their children and their grandchildren. Today we are honored to have someone that represents not only herself, but also she represents the future. She is the beacon for her generation, and with hope, she can help spread that on to the future of humankind. Today we are honored to have social media influencer, dancer, actor, and activist, Alyx Ruibal, on this episode of $5 Buzz.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of $5 Buzz. Today, this is, I don't know what the date is, but it's sometime in October. So it's spooky month. October 8th, I think it is, right around there, but who knows when this thing drops. So we don't like to say dates, but every once in a while, it's good to have a little demarcation point because I'm very adamant about doing that when I do my posts in my social media world. And today we're going to be talking a lot about social media and many other things. This is Roger Mayer, the co-host for this evening, and I want to introduce you to Mr. Pete Liska, as always. Hello, Pete. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
Very good. And over there, Pete's a new dad, so he's a little sleepy. Maybe just not even nearly 2 weeks old, roughly, right?
Oh yeah, little Sienna is 8 days old as of the recording of this program, so it's very exciting. Yes.
Jeez Louise, that's awesome. 8-day-old baby he's got over there. And then our man Nate is filling in for our normal Buzzard, Mr. George Cursar. Nate Garden, who you all may know as a Buzzard, who is on occasionally, but he's also primarily known as our artist, who does all of our artwork. I like to call him the Terry Gilliam or the Ralph Steadman of the $5 Buzz set over here. And Nate today is coming on board to be a full-on co-host today. How you doing, Nate?
Oh, I'm a little intimidated. It's big shoes to fill with George, but I'm gonna do my best. I don't have the Regents diploma either, so I think I can. I'm trying to pull it off, Roger.
I think you'll be just fine, my brother. Thing about Nate here before we introduce our guest, Nate does do, other than being an ex-reprobate, he is also a teacher now who teaches special ed, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. 20, this year, 20, Roger, 20 years.
Yeah. 20 years. Wow.
20 years in the field.
So all of this brings us to our guest tonight, who is, I think, in the future going to become a near household name, if not a full-blown household name. I think definitely on the indie circuit, but I think there's big things in the works for this young woman, and her name is Alyx Ruibal. Is that correct? I say Ruibal correct, so we all get it right in the future? Yeah. I knew that. I just, I've even seen Vito spell it Rubial. So it's
all good.
Everybody does that. Alyx, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. I'm enjoying my time, enjoying a little bit of time, just soaking in being back in California after a great shoot in Florida. So
that's right. So just to give you a little introduction, you are 23 years of age?
I actually turned 24 in August.
That's right. You did turn 24. You just turned 24 in August before we shot. So 24 years old. She
Mhm.
plays an 18-year-old in the motion picture that we just wrapped up out there in Central Florida, and probably the worst place on earth, in my opinion. But it doesn't matter. We'll talk about that in a minute. She also is a TikTok star, burgeoning star. With how many different followers now do you have on TikTok?
I think right now I'm at 431,000.
Just right around 431,000. That's right, and it keeps growing. And I've seen quite a bit of that. And she's also somebody who wants to pursue dance, or does do dance, or professional
Mhm.
dance, and has had quite a bit to say while making the film about what her costume should look like, and the style of dancing. You remember all that, the controversy there between you and the wardrobe person?
Well, yeah, so the whole thing was that so typically I wouldn't say anything about a costume if it were it's not my place at all. If there were somebody who had a lot of knowledge in dance, telling me what to wear, or if it was a group piece, or if the dance was choreographed for the costume for the costume that was given. I wouldn't, and I actually really, I wasn't going to say anything at first. And then I really thought about it, and I said, this is going to be a solo, that this will be most likely my most widely seen piece of work. And in terms of dance, it's going to just be me. I can't hide behind anybody else. And it's a hip hop piece.
Yeah.
And so I lightly, I as kindly as I possibly could, I brought it up, and said, I don't know if an aerobics outfit, because that's really what it was. It was like trying to be like more of like an 80s style aerobics outfit with tight leggings and leg warmers. And it was a really cool outfit. It was a great outfit. And then when Gregory told me that we were doing the dance on a black backdrop, they were black leggings and a very dark shirt, it would have gotten lost.
Now,
So
your instinct was correct. You're
yeah.
totally.
So I just said, maybe we should go shopping for some different options. And I said, if at the end of the day, all the options aren't great, and what you want me to wear at the end with the original outfit is what you want me to wear, I will wear it, and I will dance my best, and I will make it look good.
I don't want to give too much away what the director was thinking. Let's wait for the movie to come out, because I know that if he listens to this podcast, he might put a flamethrower to me. So, but I do know that he had a different vision than what actually ended up on screen. But I think he loved it and preferred it in the end with what your choice was. I can't give away, though, that your costume was the most fucking expensive out of all the ones that we've chosen.
I am so sorry.
I got shit for
Good
that.
job.
So one thing I want to bring up about Miss Alyx Ruibal out there in San Diego, California. She talks about it a lot on her social media. She has autism, so we'll just say is autistic, and she is an activist for autism, right? I mean, we can say that very casually here, and that you are somebody that is trying to put a face to something. I mean, why don't you go ahead and describe what it is that you do through your TikTok, through your social media, through all of the various playing fields that you make yourself aware to other people.
It's actually really interesting you bring that up, because I really wasn't sure how everything would pan out with social media. I think, and I still really don't, and where it's going, but it started out really as a way of me being able to accept myself. I think a lot of my life, I always felt like, because I was in environments with so many non-autistic people, because I didn't always understand everything the same way everybody else did, and because I just had a different, I don't know if walk of life is the best way to say it, But I just had a different, approach to things. And how I grew up and the way, and, growing up in a lot of therapy really, between that and being around a lot of non-autistic people definitely made it hard for me to be accepting of myself. And because of that, I dealt with a lot of mental health issues. And when COVID happened, I really wanted to focus on that. So I turned to TikTok, and eventually I made a video about my autism, and it was like an 8-second video. And it blew up. A lot of nice things to say. Some people didn't have a lot of nice things to say about it. But I noticed that people were wanting me to talk about it more, wanting me to talk about my experiences. People were, saying things like I gave them hope for their kids, or that I inspired a lot of autistic people who didn't want to talk about it to, start talking about it and start addressing it. And people were saying I didn't know how much my disabilities, impacted me, not accepting them impacted my mental health. And I would get DMs of like stories and stories. So I made more and more of them. And the more videos I made, the more of that I would receive. But I think the biggest thing was it was me accepting myself and accepting a lot of things that happened to me as a kid growing up being autistic, and especially as a nonverbal autistic child who eventually learned to talk and then went to public school and, went to college.
Alyx, at what age did you start communicating, the verbal communication?
Mm-hmm.
At what age?
When did I start? I started with verbal communication when I was about 5 years old.
Okay, so your parents, you're missing milestones, and your parents got a diagnosis from your pediatricians before you were in school?
I was in preschool, and my parents noticed the lack of eye contact. I wouldn't turn when people called my name. I didn't know my name.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't talking. So I was about 2.5 years old, and between 2.5 and 3 was kind of when I got my diagnosis. And I actually got diagnosed twice. So they had a team at my school diagnose me, and then they actually had a private team diagnose me as well, just to make sure. So when people give me a hard time on the internet because they don't believe that I'm autistic most of the time, I can say I don't just have one diagnosis, I have 2.
Yeah. I'm on one of those teams. I give the academic assessments for those qualifying. It's called a qualifying disability for special education services, and autism is one of the qualifying disabilities. So were you on an IEP all through school?
Yes, I had an IEP. My accommodations, definitely, I had less and less accommodations, of course, as I grew up. I didn't need certain accommodations when I was in college. My main accommodation in college was extended time on exams, was really the main one. And then because I was a dance major, I really didn't need too many academic accommodations, just because the dance program and the arts programs are just usually so different from the rest of the university.
So I got to clear up for the audience. We're speaking Greek to Roger and Pete here in the audience. An IEP is an individualized education plan. And it's kids that qualify for special education services they have to meet that through a diagnosis of a learning disability. There's speech and language, there's hearing impairment, there's occupational therapy, there's other health impairment, there's autism. And that's how they make special modifications and accommodations, like preferred seating, text to speech. There's all kinds of different things that typical kids going through school aren't permitted, so they can access their education. So there's just kind of ways to level the playing field and bridge the achievement gap for kids with disabilities.
And us as boomers growing up, I remember that's something we wouldn't have really noticed back then. I mean, we had probably mean things to say and undiagnosed, everybody went through and probably felt they just didn't have, somebody who was more like Alyx, less like, somebody who was some of the depictions and we're going to get in that representation in cinema and stuff in a bit. But it's what years does autism really start to become a focus in the United States in the education system, where they start to laser in on that being a disability?
Early 2000s is when they started. It became like the disability du jour. There were all these like events and stuff. No one knew what autism was until like Rain Man came along. Like a lot of these kids, there's been a shift in diagnosis. They used to say, they would say 1 in 1,000 births were autism births. Now it's 1 in 47 boys and 1 in 92 girls are autism births, because there's been a shift in diagnosis. Things we weren't calling autism in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we're now calling autism because it's spectrum disorder. But
So Alyx, it's one of the things that you and I would talk about and discuss when I would drive you back to the hotel, after a day of shooting or whatever. We'll get into the movie in a little bit too, but I just want to say that one of the things that I noticed and talking to listening to you talk to like Lyra Juno, the makeup artist and so forth, I remember that you would sometimes you would focus a lot. I know the majority of the people were giving you positivity, but you tended, you told me a lot of stories that were a lot darker than that, about a lot of stuff that you would receive online, as well as, how you grew up and stuff. Now, I don't want you to share everything, and I don't need you to become vulnerable for our podcast. I just would like to hear about, but you were pretty freely, openly talking about some of the negativity that was being sent your way. And why don't you give anybody who might be listening some way to combat that and an example of what that kind of negativity looked like?
Yeah. So I try as much as I can to really only to truly listen, unless it's critical. I like to think of positive, like, what you could comments from supporters or people just in general leaving positive comments on things. And then there's actual criticism of maybe something I'm saying, something that they might not agree with. Those are valid things for me to listen to. And then there's just negative troll energy that I receive a lot of. So I guess the best example recently was it was honestly one of my most wholesome videos.
So you recognize that some of your videos are not quite entirely wholesome, don't you?
I think that most videos, I think I'm one of the most, I will, as much as I am probably not correct in saying this, I genuinely think that I am one of the more wholesome creators on the app.
Right.
I see
you trying to emulate some of the other people
every now and again. I'm also 24 and I'm not a child.
Give it back to me.
And I shouldn't have to act like a child.
That's right.
I shouldn't have to act like a child. I'm 24. I can talk about certain things. I can do certain things. And but I do like to think that I'm not overly provocative on the internet. But every now and again I can have a moment. But I think this was definitely a very wholesome, something very special to me. It was a video of me stimming with my significant other, and he, it showing my significant other who, is not autistic, and I was having a rough day, and I was stimming and he tried to join in, and a lot of moments like that I try and get on video because I like having them just even for myself. I don't typically put most videos like that on the internet, but when I cut some of the moments together and I put music behind it, it was a really beautiful moment. And I thought it was something important to share. Somebody, as much as it can get in the right hands, it can also get in the wrong hands. And somebody shared it onto a different social media platform. Shared it onto a different platform, and then a platform that's known for bullying. I'm not going to share the platform just because I don't want,
Don't give it any media attention.
I don't want to give it extra attention. But
those
people
guys.
were saying really, really negative things about it, discrediting my disability, saying that I'm disgusting, that I only use things for clout, which is the furthest thing from the truth. I think, if people saw some of I've gotten death threats in my direct messages, the things I receive sometimes, there's no amount of followers that's really worth getting that kind of hate for that long of a period of time. It's not, if somebody was looking for attention, there's a lot of different ways that you could do that. And I just,
Yeah, no, I understand. I've seen, you see major celebrities who have got, millions upon millions upon millions of followers who, they let the few that get through, they crack, and they just jump off, if you follow your social media too much, I mean, that's a bigger issue we could talk about, and for a whole other subject, episode about the pros and cons, mostly cons of social media, is that, it's overwhelming, and it takes up all of your time, awareness. It makes, it's like I mean, you see it every day, Nate, more than any of us, on at school where you teach for kids. Do you allow kids to have their phones in school? What's going on there?
They can earn, it's a privilege. I make it part of their token economy. They can earn access to their phones in the afternoon.
But the fact that they even have to have access to their phone is crazy.
I try explaining that to them. Like, you realize I lived 26 whole years before the advent of a telephone. I tell them that, like, my girlfriend called, I had to take it in the kitchen on the dial in front of the whole family, the rotary phone. And the idea of a conversation like that in front of your whole family in a kitchen is just, they can't imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Alyx, why don't we, just before we hit the break, why don't we discuss a little bit about our time together and how we got to meet? I got this whole thing. There was a movie that we shot called Hellbent on Boogie in Central Florida, written and directed by Vito Trupiano, excuse me. I like to say true piano instead of a fake piano. He's a true piano. And he, but it was Gregory Thomas who called me and asked me if I, for help, advice, and ended up making the movie because I had an epiphany in the shower that I was not going to do this movie because it was a low budget film. It was going to be a difficult film. And I just said, no, I'm not going to do it. I didn't know you from Adam. Mm-hmm. And then next thing I know, something in the back of my head scratched me in the back of my head and just says, you got to make this movie. You've got to do this movie. It wouldn't let me say no. It would. And then while I was driving, and I've never had these epiphanies when I'm making a movie. I'm too punk rock for epiphanies. But occasionally, that gut feeling but this thing was knocking inside my head. I can't explain it. And a lot of that, it became clear the minute I met you. It was like, it's a fact. The minute I met you and saw your performance on that first day that we shot, I was like, holy shit, Vito, because Vito he looked for 5-6 years for somebody like you. He waited forever to find the right person. And, our experience down there was, it was quite extraordinary. A lot of rain, a lot of lightning, a lot of mosquitoes. You didn't get bit up nearly as bad as I did. It's because I'm a fat, sweaty bastard. You're, 24. So I don't know. All the kids were, it was me, and I noticed a couple of other of us who just kept getting bit like crazy. Those of us from California. Well, you're from California, but I don't know what it is. You seem to be above all that. But
I don't know about that. I had a lot of bug bites, but I'm gonna be honest. Someone sent me this little suction tool that like sucks the venom out of your bug bites, and it saved me on set.
That's okay. So that's
stopped them from itching, so they went away in like 24 hours. So it didn't look like I had bug bites.
Well,
that's excellent.
And then, so why don't you tell us really quick your experience on making the film for you from your vantage point? I know what it was like, from somebody who's done this for a long period of time, and I can go endlessly about, how making films. But this was your first film ever, and why don't you just give us a little example or a little taste of what some of your experiences were while making the movie?
Well, it was definitely the experience of a lifetime, and I'm not just saying that because you're here, and I'm not just saying that like for any other reason than I can genuinely just say that making Hellbent was the experience of a lifetime. I got to work with some incredible people, and I had always talked about the way that autism was represented in media, and knowing that I got to, even no matter where this film goes, got to have the experience where I got to, my first film, when I didn't even know that film was an option for me, to be completely honest. I had never really thought of like film acting as a career until any of this. And the first role I get is honestly a role that I really connected with.
He did a lot of research on that movie.
I did.
He did. I mean, Vito.
He did. And
he did a lot of research on writing that role. He doesn't have anybody in his fit, but he was, for some reason, for no personal reason other than wanting to make the film about a person with autism, that he wrote that and did all the research to write that character. It's very.
He wrote it so well too. He wrote Quinn so well. And I said it. I tried, to put my own little, to give, the film my own version of what's in the script. But what he wrote was, not typically what you see on screen when we talk about autistic characters in film and in TV. And it was definitely, I felt it when I first read the script. I really appreciated how Quinn was portrayed.
Right. Absolutely.
What's the film about? Tell us about the film a little bit. What is it?
Yeah, what's the film about from your? I mean, I can give you my producer pitch real quick, and maybe I'll do that. But I want to hear how you say it. Let's hear your pitch, Alyx.
It's about, well, it's a family drama, of course, but it's really about how that's really interesting. I feel like it's about.
It's funny that you're having trouble. Okay.
It's about this tornado that kind of comes in to a family that has kind of been in the same habits for a very. And when I talk about a tornado, I'm not talking about a literal tornado. I'm talking about a person. I'm talking about somebody in the family coming in and turning the everyday life that this family has been living for a very long time upside down. And I think that's the best way to put it. And questioning everybody's values, questioning everybody's, intentions. When this tornado comes in, it really puts people's values and people's actions in question.
And that tornado is in the guise of Shiloh Fernandez playing your brother Alan. It's to do the elevator pitch. It's the family drama about a young autistic female by the name of Quinn, who just wants to be a professional dancer who lives with her domineering mother. Alan, her wayward brother, comes home and disrupts their lives. As you eloquently put it, a tornado comes in and just sort of creates havoc. And it's a battle for your soul, your character's soul, between what is your dream of what's going to happen and the reality. So it's got a little bit of Florida Project, maybe a little bit of Sunshine without being too overtly humorous. It's got, it's got all these wonderful elements to it. That includes a location that helps because it doesn't look like Los Angeles. It does not look like New York. Does not even look like, it looks like Central fucking Florida. So it's a story about, it's great. I mean,
sounds like it's a needed story for the canon. I wanted to ask you, Alyx, how you felt about these are old films to you, but like our idea as an advocate of exceptional learners, I get pissed off about shit like Rain Man and I Am Sam, and that being the broad brush, the idea of exceptional learner and autism. Like there is far more. I mean, there are people like Dustin Hoffman's character, but they're few and far between. Like my experience with learners with autism is, I mean, nowhere near that. That's it's. When I was reading the emails going back and forth, I had not met you. I know nothing of you or anything. Just what was in the Rutgers research file. I was curious. You made this film. It's a welcome addition to the disability canon or whatever you want to call it. There aren't a lot of films like that. You got like I Am. You probably not, have you ever seen these movies, Rain Man and I Am Sam?
Yes.
Like
yes.
they're kid. These are old films. Does it bother you? I mean, it bothers me as an advocate and teacher. Exceptional learners. That this is kind of it's like a whitewash broad brush.
Yeah. I think things that. So I always had a hard time with film. I think it's always a really sensitive subject because I don't like to, talk badly about the actors who play these characters, or even honestly, sometimes the direction of it, or not all. It's because I think sometimes it's just how society hasn't gotten to certain places wasn't in certain places like progressively.
Yeah. Well, I said the men in this room, like there's no mainstreaming going on when we were in school. The kids that were, they were either institutionalized or they were, in a basement, moved in a pod around the school. I think today's school does a lot better job of integrating kids. And our idea of autism was Rain Man. We were never encountered anyone with autism because of the shift in diagnosis, and like high functioning kids like you wouldn't have been identified back then. And our idea of autism is Rain Man. Like,
I
think a film we watched.
I think the ideas of autism, and they really haven't gotten in terms of media, which is why I was so intrigued by Vito's script, is because, and it's like I said, I think a lot of times it's because certain things come from textbooks or scientific research and not looking as much into listening. I think a lot of times people don't, and I don't know the process of developing these characters, but it really sounds like Vito, when he created Quinn, really listened to a lot of autistic voices, because it was little nuances in Quinn that, made her so different from honestly a lot of other characters you see. I think the two most popular types of characters, you get the Rain Men of media, and then you get like the Dr. Sean Murphys of the media, like the Good Doctor. Yeah. And so with that is Sam from Atypical, Sheldon Cooper, all of those characters. And then you have the Rain Men, or a lot of, and it's not as much as I personally would love to see like more representation from autistic people. I've always felt they should at least be part of the process. I think that their, autistic voices should be telling the stories, or at least that, if you're going to be profiting off of this disability, that they should be included to at least a certain capacity.
Even as a consultant, you mean, or as like, if so say like
at the very least.
So I mean, you got the caliber of Dustin Hoffman playing Rain Man, and he wins an Academy Award for it. And I'm not so sure they really. I mean, I'm sure that they had somebody that, in a movie of that size, I'm sure he went and hung around.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I would imagine he, some that kind of performance. But it was in time. It's not quite the same as being in blackface, but there is a little element to it, right?
Yeah, and to use the big name, but to use the big name and to have that level of performance, but profiting off of, honestly, and revolving an entire movie around a disability that no one on that set had. You
had a problem with Leo DiCaprio for Gilbert Grape. We talked about you and I had a conversation about this in the car.
Yeah.
You pointed out.
I don't know.
And
I don't know. I don't know if like I said, it's nothing against the actors themselves.
The portrayal.
I think it's about, sometimes it's about the portrayal. I think it's also about how it's misinformed people. I think my biggest issue of it is how it's misinformed people to believe that autism only really has two faces.
Right. Okay.
And then when people try and talk about it, and then because people try, and when people talk about life experience with autism, when I talk about things, because all people know are two very extreme stereotypes, people get a lot more reluctant to listen to me or to voices like me.
I think that is changing though, with all the inclusive practices that go on in school. Yeah. Like you when you were in school, were you just on an IEP and you had some learning goals? You weren't in an SDC, like a special day class. You were matriculated with your grade level peers. What was your school like?
So when I was little, my schooling was very different from when I was, middle school, high school. Mm-hmm. When I was little, because I was nonverbal and because, and a lot of people tend to use functioning labels, but I like to say I was very high support as a kid. Yeah. I needed a lot of support. I was in therapy about 30 hours a week. Nonverbal
speech and language and
when they diagnosed me, they said I would most likely, never be able to live on my own or never have a career of my choice. That was a very big reality to a lot of the people who diagnosed me at the time. And of course that changed a lot. But I did have to do a lot of therapy. So I did that. And I was in preschool. And then I also had elementary school was when I really started transitioning out of that 30 hours a week of therapy and more into, just going to school and having to do my homework at school.
But when you went to school, you were in a general education classroom with an assistant or an environmental aide, or you were?
Yes. So I did. Yeah. I never had to go to a specific, designated.
You weren't in a special
school for.
Okay.
But I did have special education classes, like speech therapy classes. I did have certain classes where I was in public school in separate classes. Yeah. But I never had to go to a designated school.
Yeah, that's well, they don't really exist anymore. They're non-public schools for behavior cases, but we treat all of that but that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Your generation's idea of autism are these kids that matriculate in and out and mainstream in the classes. Our idea of autism, because there was no shift in diagnosis, and our whole idea of autism was on the screen. It was Rain Man.
Yeah.
We
It
weren't
was,
around.
yeah.
We weren't around. There weren't autistic kids mainstreaming and integrating in our classrooms.
Yeah.
Which actually,
Now there are, and there's more tolerance, and your generation is growing up with a lot more tolerance and empathy than
oh yeah,
we ever
Gen
had.
Z is so tolerant of, you know, a lot of things that you know, and it's very progressive, and it, you know, it's showing some really positive,
I
you know,
tell
results.
parents that when parents are concerned about kids with disabilities mainstreaming into a gen ed classroom, I'm like, your typical learners are getting far more from those kids than anything they're going to get from hanging out with the gen ed kids and just, you know, osmotically hanging out.
Pete, you had a question there? We
I just
haven't heard much from you.
That's okay. This is, I mean, Alyx, fascinating questions, Nate. Absolutely.
you.
Just since we're back on the topic of education, actually, I just did have one question from earlier.
Mhm.
Does the regulations vary from state to state, or is it a federal kind of guideline as to how we educate our children with autism? Now, maybe one of you guys can speak to that.
As far as I know, I'm not sure about state, if it's state or if it's federal, but I do know that a lot of schooling, it's usually mixed into public schools, like special education programs are typically, or public, private, it's typically mixed into general education schools. And typically the programs for special education vary between school to school, I think, is mainly what I've known about it.
I only ask because I've just heard over time that, you know, like in some situations, parents would even move out of a state because it had a subpar, maybe standard for educating our children.
Nate, do you know a little bit about that?
There's federal funding. There's the Common Core, and every state has to provide the same curriculum framework. The problem is in some states where, you know, if you go, I won't name a state, but we know where the low performing states are. The quality of instruction isn't as good as it might be in a place like a Connecticut or a California or a New York or a more progressive state where educators are compensated better and, you know, need to pursue a master's degree and be a little more qualified.
Well, I mean,
I
that's all.
know,
Yeah. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Alyx. Go ahead.
it's all good. I know when I was younger, there really actually weren't, and this might just be about ethics, but I know a lot about the fact that, at least when I was younger, there really weren't a lot of rules as to what you could and couldn't do in a classroom for special education. I think there are more rules now, but it was really interesting because you could be in a gen ed, like a gen ed school, like a public school, and there weren't a lot of rules or specified, or maybe not rules, but enforced rules for special education. I think that's changed a little bit now, but I know, because I hear things from like parents, and they are it's always super interesting to talk to certain voices about this, because someone was like, I can't trust, you know, saying that they can't trust their child alone with a teacher, can't trust their child. Some parents have a hard time, you know, trusting schools with their child, and a lot of it being due to you know, the fact that that laws and, you know, enforced rules being like evolving in schools. At least that's what I know. Nate, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong on anything.
Depending on the disability, a lot of kids that like would require assisted living situations later on,
Mm-hmm.
kids that are,
Yeah.
you know, the non-ambulatory kids that aren't feeding tube stuff, kids that are, you know, really impacted kids. The state to state, I know that long-term care definitely varies. And I think
it also speaks to how important your activism and playing an honest role as such in a film will be to make maybe make these standards a little better in states that don't get them, as you mentioned, Nate, or the privileged groups on the coasts, or however it works out. Maybe Alyx, it's great that your work, like I'm saying, through this role and your other activism will help with all of that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. No, I really appreciate it. I really look to be. I am extremely excited about my role. I also am open. I also know that with taking this role, I'm going to be putting myself very open to a lot of criticism from community, and I'm fully ready for that as well. So
what do you mean? What kind of criticism are you talking about, girl? Come on.
I'm saying I think especially when we're talking about autistic roles, I think it's especially because, and I'm talking about a lot of the community that I see online, especially on TikTok, gets very sensitive, and rightfully so, about a lot of the whenever you see autistic characters in film or in television, I know that seeing that there's going to be representation on the screen.
But your role in the way that Vito treats it is not. There's no didactic element to it. It's not taking a hammer and hitting you over the head with it. Your character,
and that's what I enjoy about it too. Is like the whole film doesn't revolve around it, which was also something I really appreciated as well.
It's not a message movie by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, so I've got a question now. So you release this TikTok video, it goes viral. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you have these followers overnight. How did it happen? What?
So
how can we do it?
I'm just kidding. TikTok is so interesting because it's the only platform that is so organic, and with the algorithm of it is so organic that you could have zero videos, 0 followers, new account, post a video, and it can go viral.
My curiosity is this: you just made a video. You're a kid that's grown up. You've got autism. You have the social barriers. That's always been a difficult tap dance for you.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're getting inundated with these DMs, and this all of a sudden this like popularity for lack of it. Are you compelled? Like, is there a compulsion to answer? Was there a time when you just started answering DMs and just responding to all? I mean, you could probably open your mailbox right now and there'd be thousands of them, right? Like, is that how it works?
Yeah, I tend to. I think when I first started, I've never cried, and I've never cried, period. But I will say this with pride: I have never cried from hate I receive on the internet. I never have. Even because I woke up one morning and my video was like performing my first video that really blew up had maybe about 100,000 views, couple 100,000 views when I went to bed, and then I woke up and it had almost 2 million views, and it had a lot of comments, a lot of them not nice.
Do you read all the comments? That's my. Is there part of you? I started
scrolling through that first morning, and I had already gotten bullied a lot of my life. So when somebody doesn't have the audacity to say it to my face, there's already this. It already seemed rather invalid to me, and a lot of times bullying comes from it's not me, it's a lot of time them. So I don't really make anything like that too personal, and I just kind of got up and I kept going about my day and I kept making videos.
No,
good for you, Alyx. You're way ahead of the game.
Trolling aside, I'm just curious if you were like you engage with people, like as someone that had like social barriers and difficulty navigating those relationships, when all of a sudden you're like a TikTok product? Are you, what's that like for you?
What do you mean?
Like, that's gotta be, I mean, that'd be mind-blowing. Like,
Yeah, I think especially handling social media as somebody who is you know, not really, already not great with social cues and already at a disadvantage socially, it definitely is, it is a lot more effort and it's a lot of work, and it is definitely territory I still don't in a lot of ways don't understand. A lot of times I go in my I live stream a lot, and people will feel upset that I'm ignoring them in the comments, but a lot of times I get so overloaded by the amount of, comments that are there, and I'm always so grateful for it. And I say it every single time. I say I'm so grateful for the amount of people who want to engage with me and want to comment, and I totally encourage it, and keep commenting. I just know that at the end of the day, as much as you may not see it, I am still autistic at the end of the day, and that this is a lot for me, no matter how much I live stream. And sometimes I can get a little bit of this overload, and it's so sometimes I answer one comment at a time. Sometimes I'll get like 20 comments at once, and I will have to just pick one question and answer it as thoroughly as I can, and then move on to the next one. And probably already at that point, 200 or 300 questions have already gone by.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering, if you had a compulsion to interact with all these people, given that, there was.
I do. I just, a lot of the time, I don't know how to get to them all, and I always feel super guilty about it. And I'm not always the best with knowing how to engage sometimes, and 24/7, because a lot of the time, your social media accounts, they don't go to bed with you.
Yeah, the hemispheres. You're famous.
So,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out though, she did this shit to me all the time on set, where she would take a phrase and she has a poetic way of speaking, and it's just right now she says, this so-and-so person does not have the audacity to confront me directly. I mean, it's an absolute perfect way to say that, but you never hear it put that way. Alyx is always turning a phrase, and I kept writing them down somewhere. I wish I had them in front of me now, but she would always say something like that, and it would just like, holy shit, you should be a poet.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have a way of saying things. And I also wanted to point out, I don't think we mentioned what school you went to. You went to Rutgers, right?
Yes, I graduated cum laude with a BFA in dance from Rutgers University.
Congratulations. That's
No
incredible.
small
Thank you.
stakes there. So I think we're getting close to that time, Alyx. I think we breezed right through this whole day.
Yeah.
This episode, and I want to, again say thank you for coming on board. I know that you and I've got a lot more work to do. As this thing starts to evolve and shape. I think we're going to be looking at it coming out sometime in 2023. Probably take a year. Low budget films have a tendency to take a little while when you're editing and doing color and sound and composing, and it's can't wait for people to see the dance sequence, which will, I cannot tell you, just watching it being shot gave me goosebumps. And
Thank you.
I believe it was Marissa, the costume designer. She cried. There were people who I would turn around, I'd come in because I wasn't always behind the camera, and I'd see people fucking crying, and it wasn't even that important of a scene sometimes. It was just, those scenes in the bedroom with you and Shiloh when you're having your brother-sister talk in those scenes, and with Kenzan Takahashi's cinematography, the movie, I think it's going to be something special. Boys, is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Alyx, real quick, when did you start dancing? You've been dancing your whole life?
Musical theater was a form of therapy for me. One of my autism therapies was actually, I had a lot. My parents literally said, we are trying everything under the sun, and put me in every single form of therapy, one of them being musical theater. And I, maybe specifically dance, they always thought I had quote unquote 2 left feet. And they never really pushed dance for me. I always kind of did it as a hobby, as therapy. And then say about 14 or 15, I kind of had this epiphany of I want to be a professional dancer, even though I had nowhere near the training I needed. And so, yeah, I'd say about 14 was kind of when I really stepped into my own as a dancer and really pushed for that.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on the role, and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's important work, and we can look back on the irresponsibility of our past in filmmaking, maybe with this responsible.
I don't want to say it like that.
Well, it's only. I think it might be irresponsible in the sense that, as Nate had pointed out, and you both pointed out, that it left a large portion of the country that watched it, or people in the world that watched these, with maybe the wrong impression, and that's where I feel like maybe the irresponsibility is, but maybe not, maybe it wasn't, but
yeah, I think, I don't want to point fingers, because I don't know where any of this comes from, right? I don't know where any of the development of any of these characters comes from. I think, for whatever character was written, the actors did an incredible job portraying probably what was on that script and putting it on film. So I really don't want to talk down on anybody, but I will say that, there was this huge, there's this huge gap missing. And, I'm excited for a day where that gap can be filled with all different sorts of, faces about autism, and including autistic voices in that process.
Well put. That's a great way to look at it. Absolutely.
There could be 500 films on autism, and it's such a
not be
broad
enough.
spectrum.
That's
like, the more I work with these kids, the more I peer-reviewed research I read, the more I learn. It's like, I'm convinced everyone is on the spectrum. Everyone in the world falls somewhere on that spectrum, whether it's at a clinical level or not. That's another thing, but there are components of every person that they're little pieces of, compulsions, being routines. There's all.
I think everybody can relate to. I think, because what I've learned about autism is actually, because I do a lot of research on this, because I make sure to, if I'm giving informational videos out, that that what I'm saying is fully 100%. I actually learned, because I always used to think that the spectrum was incredibly linear. That the spectrum was very linear, in that however far away you drifted from that line was how autistic you were, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But actually, what I learned, fun fact, is that brain, the human brain, actually, there's 2 different neurotypes. So there's neurotypical, which is, there is neurotypical people, which is kind of the standard, quote unquote, and then you have the neurodivergent, which actually is its own separate neurotype. Think of it I like to think of it like Apple software versus Windows software.
Yeah.
Literally two human brains that run on different softwares. Some are not capable of certain things, some are, and some just work differently, and but autistic people, but I definitely do agree, everybody relates to certain qualities in autistic people a lot, which is why which is why so many people connect with autism films. And I definitely support that aspect. I definitely support that. But I think, I am excited for a day where autistic voices are included. Because I think, but yeah, no, it's, I definitely agree with you, Nate, though, that so many people have like these, the little things that are so emphasized for a lot of people who are on the spectrum are like so relatable to everybody else.
Like sensory and smells and
yeah.
People that perseverative patterns like Kubrick films. All you talk about is Kubrick films.
Mm-hmm.
You know who Stanley Kubrick was, Alyx?
You may have to remind me.
He directed a couple movies, one called 2001: A Space Odyssey, one called The Shining, one called Full Metal Jacket. Barry Lyndon.
Okay, I know the work.
Okay. Oftentimes, a lot of directors consider that one of the top 5 greatest directors that ever lived. But
yeah.
Be that as it may, I want to say thank you again for coming on board, Alyx.
Thank you so much.
The more I get closer to your orbit, the more that makes my life a lot brighter. I mean, I can't.
Thank you so much.
And very excited to see where this takes, not just for me, but for you. I mean, not just for Vito and everybody else, but to see how this plays out. This is going to be quite a fun next 4 years of our lives.
I really hope so too.
I want to thank Nate for coming on board as being our co-host today. I think he did, just coincidentally, just happens to be somebody who could speak to this. And I think that also helped, my dumbass do this job a lot better. Pete, of course, as always, we know and love you. And we love our new, we can say now, Sienna Amora Aliska is
Congratulations, Pete, by the way.
Thank you very much, Alyx. And thank you very much for coming on. This was an absolute pleasure speaking with you. We're really excited to see what you do. You're way ahead of your time, and you got the right idea on a lot of things there. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. And thank you so much. Oh my goodness, Nate. Thank you. I loved also hearing your perspective on things too. As somebody in the system and the education system, it means a lot. And
you're the success story. If they're a parent with a new diagnosis and they could look 15, 20 years down the road to your achievement, I mean, that gives a lot of hope to people. So,
Thank you. No, and I appreciate all that you do for people like me. And thank you so much, Roger, for letting me hang with you guys today. You guys are the best. And I miss you already, Roger.
I miss you too. We'll see each other soon. Pete, you want to take us out?
Guys, thank you. That was our episode, and thanks for listening. Thank you, Alyx. And if you guys have any questions for us, you can reach us at $5buzz@gmail.com. That's $5VEDOLLARBUZZ@gmail.com. Ask us any questions. We'll get back to you. And again, thanks a lot, guys. Have a wonderful day.